more business boosting content, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and like our posts.
All right, another very good morning to Webinar Wednesday, heading towards spring. So I think everyone's in a great mood. Importantly, tell us where you're from, tell us what your expectations are, tell us if you're looking for funding. And you know, funding is one of the major challenges, but it also represents one of the greatest opportunities. So our funding discussion continues, our funding journey continues. Look, we know as of today, it's 2 weeks to go to the Business Show Africa. So here again, let us know if you're going to be joining us at Sandton Convention Center in 2 weeks' time for the Business Show Africa. Currently, we're just heading towards 30,000 delegates, business owners attending the two-day extravaganza. So we're really looking forward to that, but we haven't got there yet because this morning I've got another super funding experience, and I'm going to interview or talk to at least Cole Baumeister, who's the CEO of Finance Africa. And I've had the pleasure of chatting to Cole a short while ago. Look, I've been following what they do. They're a major player in the funding business, specifically asset funding, but I don't want to talk about what Cole does because he's going to certainly do that. But before I bring him on stage, please let us know where you're from, what your expectations are, if you're ready to access funding, what you would like to get out of this discussion going forward this morning. And then, of course, we'll take it from there. Now, I know my discussion with Cole, there's a problem that we've got. We're both equally passionate about funding. So it's going to be really interesting to witness from your guys' side. But another important point is that we do know technology. If technology for some reason fails us, don't leave us, we'll be back. But touch wood, it hasn't happened to date, so we're kind of grateful for that. But let me not continue without Cole. Cole, please join me on stage. Cole, great to talk to you again. We've had a great discussion earlier this morning, and Cole, lovely. I know you're extremely experienced in this game, and I don't want to spoil it by telling our delegates out there what you do and what your experience entails, but possibly a little bit about Finance Africa and a little bit about yourself, Carl, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, Shane, thanks, Mike. And again, Mike, thanks for having me, and to everybody that's joined, good morning, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Cole Baumeister. I'm the CEO of Finance Africa. I have been in the finance sector or the banking sector for about 45 years, my young age. But with that said, you know, I've been in all the banks. I do understand, obviously, the banking systems, and having come out of the retail banks in all different areas, whether it be retail banking or the asset-based finance, where predominantly I've spent my time. And we built, obviously, a lot of the asset businesses within the banking systems itself here. So, but over the last 10 years, outside of asset-based finance, we had our own rental company. We then did a B transaction in which we concluded a business, and now we've called ourselves Finance Africa. And we did a B transaction with our partner, the Katana Group. So the Katana Group, today, they employ about 12,000 people, and we're all part of a growth phase. And we were looking at a finance structure within that environment to go help the market there. So 6 years ago, we created the first Black women asset-based rental finance company in South Africa. And that focus there, predominantly as we grew it, was to go raise some capital. And a big focus of our business is to look at the SME market where we are here. So we operate out of Johannesburg, just outside of Pretoria, Johannesburg area. We service the whole country, which is quite nice. And obviously, in time, we'll expand as we go along now. So we are financier of businesses. We don't finance private individuals, and we do it on a rental structure in terms of where our business is here. So, and there's many questions, Mark, around asset-based finance. You know, what is asset-based finance? How do I get asset-based finance, et cetera, et cetera? And maybe just to lead on from where we are, let me sort of maybe give a bit of a broad, what is asset-based finance? What does asset-based finance do here? So firstly, we look at public and private sectors, but our funding we've raised, especially when it comes to public sector in the government space, we don't finance directly public sector, but what we do, there are many people that go out and get contracts in the public sector that require funding for purchase order finance, et cetera, et cetera. But we obviously look at the private sector much more here. So just the high level of, what is asset-based finance in our environment? We finance movable assets, and most movable assets are assets that are revenue generating assets. So we don't finance bricks and mortar. We don't finance a building. But just to give our listeners or everyone that's on the podcast just a high level of what sort of where the markets are we playing. So I think that'll paint the picture and it'll allow them to sort of stimulate some of the questions they might want to ask you. So in the passenger market, in terms of vehicles, we finance obviously in the vehicle market. We've got young SMEs that come into our environment. A lot of guys want to become a plumber, hypothetically, wants to go buy a bakkie. We finance the bakkie. We help the guys there. But there's also the commercial vehicle market. So a lot of guys do long hauls, bigger assets, bigger different structures, and obviously we do that. There's mining equipment. We refer to it as yellow metal, Mark. So a lot of guys in the mining, we help in that sector, but obviously a lot of different assets. There's the solar sector we play in. So a lot of guys are putting solar panels on their buildings and businesses to try and bring their electricity bills down. The IT equipment area, we refer to IT equipment and office automation. It's a vast area, from computers to data centers to printers to all the office automation stuff. A lot of SMEs require that in terms of the own environment, so they can obviously run their businesses. Agricultural sector, so a lot of the farmers, a lot of young SME farmers have started their farming processes, but they haven't got the mechanization, Mark, to work their fields and obviously set the off-take, so they've got to go hire equipment. It's hell of expensive for a lot of the guys out there. We finance obviously agricultural sector, material handling, so we talk about manufacturing, forklifts and that sort of stuff. The machinery production lines, if you're a manufacturer of stuff inside factories, you've got a production line, we'll finance the production line for you. Even company offices, a lot of guys have got their companies, their office equipment has got, and I'm talking about their furniture is now, it's obsolete, it's old, and they want to upgrade their furniture. We even finance that for you. So we just did some water purification plants for some people, because a lot of the areas that have not got good water supply have created some great purification areas to help a lot of the needy. We finance that. We in the medical industry, we help youngsters. So Mark, I think the picture here is we're trying to show you that we finance all assets. If it's got a serial number, Mark, we finance it, yeah. It's as simple as that, yeah.
Yeah, Carl, well put, and I think that's the point, isn't it? People need to, and I think the big problem with not the problem, but the challenge with SMEs is that they don't know where to go for what type of funding.
Yeah.
And I think you've explained that extremely well. And of course, the other side we spoke offline earlier is that, one thing is about accessing funding. And the thing is, what do I need to do to access funding? Yeah. And you've mentioned asset funding, Carl, but maybe touch on the different types of funding available, if I can ask.
Sure. Yeah. So Mark, so obviously in the banking sector of South Africa, there's a lot of different options. There's obviously tier one banks, and there's a lot of banks that offer different funding. But as Finance Africa, we obviously do asset-based finance, and as I said, of movable assets. We refer to invoice discounting or purchase order or short-term loans, and we put some capital aside, because there's a lot of guys who go out, Mark, and guys get contracts to go into environments where they need that short-term funding. They don't have the 30, 60, 90-day money to go and assist them to try close those contracts where they can. And a lot of the SMEs, Mark, are losing those contracts here. So the big thing for me is, a lot of guys are trying to start up their businesses. They don't know how to do that. And for me, one of the biggest things, and we see it in all the sectors that we play, and especially when it comes to asset-based, we find that we operate on the rental model. We refer to the rental model. So we buy the asset for the customer from where they get it, and I'll explain the process there. And then we on-rent it to the customer, and then obviously utilize that through the period of the contract with various options at the end of the contract. Yeah. So I think the big thing is, I think the question is, how does asset-based finance work, Mark? What is an SME got to do? So I think just let me share some ideas. I think, and I always say that, funding is not just about the funder. Funding is about there are two parties when it comes to funding. It's the SME himself or the client, and it's the funder. So in most cases, if a young SME is going to look at an asset and he's got a business and he wants to go, he's got to go identify what he wants to try get. So let's say, for example, a guy wants to buy a motor car. He's got to go identify the motor car, what that asset is. So he's got to obviously negotiate with the dealership, try to get the best price, but go to a supplier that is an approved supplier, because a lot of these suppliers out there, and I say with respect to a lot of them, a lot of the guys are fly by nights. The guys are there one day, they're not there the next day. So they don't give the support to the client or the SME through the period of the contract. So what we do with those suppliers, we onboard them into Finance Africa, and we make sure that they're reputable, they have a great check record. And the biggest thing for me is not about the bakkie the guy's buying, is what is the service process with that client, Mark, through the period of the contract. and we lock the client in, we lock the supply in, and we make sure, because a lot of the suppliers today, and if there's any suppliers that is on this chat out there that is looking for finance for their end user customer, would obviously like to assist them too. And it's just to make sure, Mark, that the client that is buying the asset is looked through the period of the contract, because a lot of guys are left in the lurch here. So we try to protect the whole value chain, and obviously the client for us is our major player, whilst the supplier is obviously very important in our lives here. So, and we then follow a process, Mark. We follow a process. We look at various options for the SMME in terms of what suits the SMME's needs, and we try to tailor then solutions, obviously, to fit that SMME needs without burdening too much in terms of his expenses, etc., etc. We don't want to put him in a difficult position from day one, so the guy can trade through the period of his contracts. Yeah.
Now, Carl, talking about SMEs getting funding, what information and documents are normally required for SMEs when applying for funding?
Yeah, so Mark, we follow normal banking practice. So in normal process, there's a lot of SMEs, Mark, that haven't been trained. So it might be a new guy off the street. He doesn't have financial statements. He doesn't really have a home, all this good stuff. So we follow a process with those guys. In most cases, our staff member gets hold of, we allocate a customer to a staff member. And in that situation, then we start a process. It's a normal company application we fill out. If the guy's got bank statements, I think that'll be quite nice if there's some sort of bank statements. And most of the young SMEs that start, a lot of guys put a business plan together. They try to say, where's my business plan going to go? And I say to a lot of the guys, a lot of the SMEs, guys, think of that business plan. Think of where you're going. Go talk to guys with experience. Go get a mentor that's going to help you put a business plan together. So when you come to a financier and you talk to the guy at that point, then there's a sensible chat across the table, because a lot of the guys in business of our nature, there's very experienced guys, and obviously we want to try out. But the biggest thing, Mark, the SME is not going to have all the answers, because it's these young entrepreneurs. They're not going to have all the answers. But we go in a process. Obviously, we look at all the directors of the company. What is the quotation from the supplier they want to buy? Your normal KYC documentations, financial statements. But we'll take the customer, Mark, through the whole process. And if they've got nothing, we'll ask them for what they have, and we'll try to build a structure. So if it's day one and the guy's got nothing, we might take him on a journey that by day 3 or 4 or 5, he's built a nice structure that can come to us, that can present something to us that is fundable going forward. Yeah. So it's the normal standard stuff, but we're not going to ask for a list of 20, 30 things if it's a brand new guy. Those guys who are already been in business for a long time, they've got financial statements. We'll assess the history and have a look and see, is what the assets they're buying, are they replacing assets, and are they obviously building new assets to expand their companies. Yeah.
Yeah, and Carl, I like what you're saying there. It's quite different and unique. Is that it's not merely about getting funding. It's about helping that young SME and what they need to do to become funding ready in order to access funding.
Yeah,
you can help them on that small journey to be able to come to the end point of putting through a high quality application to get approved, of course.
Yeah, Mark, very much so. And we've had a couple of guys, and obviously a lot of the guys that do come away, they are experienced already, so they come and they're well prepared, and congrats to those guys. With that said, Mark, there's also a couple of guys we've taken. I mean, I know some of our staff have taken guys, and they've even gone on the journey for 6 months with these people, where they've helped him open a bank account and they've helped him do the various other stuff. So whilst it's not our core business, we're also very mindful that you've got to start somewhere. We all started somewhere. We all started somewhere many years ago. Somebody helped us. But a lot of guys are going to sit in front of you and say, well, I want to buy a bucky. But, and I've made some points here just to say, tell us about your business. Tell us where you're going. What are you doing? Who are your opposition? Where's the markets you're going to play in? How are you going to generate your first bit of revenue? Have you got cash flows in 30 days time when I draw your first installment? Have you got money there? Have you looked at insurance options for your business? What is your structure like? What are the skill sets in your company? What are the skill sets? What are your skill sets of your staff that you have? What are the skill sets of your partners? What does everybody bring to the table? And I just made a note to Mark again, just prepare, and sometimes don't oversell, but also what are the stumbling blocks in your business? And sometimes a funder wants to know you've got stumbling blocks because you thought that through also, and you know how to trade out of that. Yeah. So we do help guys, Mark, as much as we possibly can to go on that journey. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Carl, get into the actual funding journey. What happens during the funding application and approval process?
Yeah. So, Mark, what again? As you know, once again, if somebody approaches us and they go into our website or they come to us via supplier, our staff member will take them on the full journey. So, obviously, from all the applications, once we got all the information inside our business, Mark, we do obviously all our own credit. So we credit vet all our own customers ourselves, and we apply our own credit processes to our end user customers here. So, in that process, our staff member will continuously engage with the customer. And through that, obviously, try to get as much info as possible, whatever that info might be. We then sit inside our own environment, as we do once, twice, 3, 4 times a week, and we will then improve. If the transaction is approved as presented, Mark, from what the customer's given us, then we follow process. We give them the approval, we give the customer a term sheet, we offer him different options. And one of the biggest options is obviously inside our business, which is nice. We try to offer a one-stop shop. So besides the asset-based finance, we also own an insurance arm to our business. So we try to include the insurance arm there so that the customer knows that if I'm going to pay you $1,000 a month, my asset's also covered. And should there be a claim through that process, obviously we handle the claim. So we will take the customer on the full journey. We'll engage with the supplier also. We'll get the full invoices. And we'll just make sure that through the whole signing process with the supplier, with the customer, that it's as seamless as possible. And we also make sure that when the client picks up his asset, he gets exactly what he's paying for here. And then we take him, Mark, through all the terms and conditions of our contracts. We make sure he understands what his payment date is. We want to ensure that he understands what happens when he changes his address, so he makes contact with us, so that we obviously follow our assets. And we just keep the guy in the full loop all the time. Also, what happens if a customer doesn't pay, Mark? What happens if a guy gets to a point and contacts you live, he doesn't pay? How do we handle the customer there? And I'll explain that also to you as we go along here. Yeah. So, but Mark, we take the guy on the full journey here.
Yeah, well, that's important, Carlos. We know that not every SME understands what's part of their journey, and
very much so.
To be shown the way is critically important, as opposed to afterwards. Afterwards is sometimes a bit too late.
Yeah.
And so that's critical. But look, our questions are coming in fast and furious, Carl, because I think that SMEs are pretty excited about what's been said here this morning. And I'm not sure if I've asked this question, but is which industries and sectors typically qualify for business funding?
Yeah, so Mark, we look at all sectors, all industries, all sectors. Yeah, so obviously we watch the market. Sometimes you have a spurt in certain markets. You got a lot of guys all of a sudden buying commercial vehicle trucks, for example, in the transport industry, because everybody's getting coal contracts, hypothetically, and then all of a sudden that goes out. So Mark, we look at all sectors. We assist everybody where possible. As I said, if it's got a serial number, we will finance that asset, provided it's a movable asset. So when we look at the transport industry, we look at the health sector, we look at the agricultural sector, we look at the mining sector, we look at the medical sector, we look at the material handling industry. And as I said earlier on, and all the assets that fit inside that environment. But when it comes to the public and private sectors, those are two different ways you fund, because they are done in a very different basis. Because private sector is very easy to look at. Public sector, a lot of the structures go through tender processes there. Although our funding doesn't fund the actual public sector, we fund a lot of the SMEs that get contracts within that structure via processes here. So Mark, across the board, any asset type, but not fixed assets, as I said, yeah.
Yeah. Now, often, our message at NSBC has often been this way, Carl, is that borrow money, nothing wrong with it, but borrow for the right reason.
Correct.
That's not just the next point. How can, it may sound like an obvious question, but not necessarily always, but how can funding help an SME start, operate, and grow?
Yeah. So Mark, one of the biggest things, and again, the point over here is, we structure payments to meet an SME's needs, and asset-based finance is quite a quick thing. So it shouldn't be a long thing. You shouldn't be waiting 2, 3, 4 months to raise money to buy a motor car down the road. So obviously, asset-based finance, a lot of guys are saying, well, I need all the cash. I need the cash. You don't need cash all the time to buy assets, and again, sometimes if you come along to us as a brand new SME, for example, we might ask you for a small deposit. So there's a little bit of skin in the game from the SME. But in most cases, Mark, we finance all assets without a deposit. Yeah. So the first thing, obviously, is once you get the asset on board, straight away, the asset becomes a revenue-generating asset. So straight away, it obviously assists you with your cash flows. And we fund assets over different types. So there's a lot of different things we do. We don't take a laptop, for example, and finance it over 5 years, because that doesn't help an SME. We do it over a shorter period, but we also don't put too much pressure on the SME's cash flow, Mark. That's the big thing. And I always use the phrase, Mark, 6 to 8 times cover. So what does that mean? I always say, as an SMME, try get asset-based finance through people like ourselves or whoever it might be. Then make sure that you have enough cash flow reserves in difficult times, when obviously we're trading as businesses, because in difficult times, a lot of SMEs that go into business, Mark, have never traded in difficult periods. Straight away along comes a crisis, interest rates go up, and we haven't made provision for that. Donald Trump does something crazy and the fuel price goes up. And a lot of guys in the transport sector haven't passed those costs on. So in that environment, asset-based finance works. It frees up capital. A big thing for me is try get new assets where you possibly can, because older assets, you might not be up to date with the market in terms of the quality of what that asset produces. So if you're knitting jerseys, for example, and your assets are old, you're not going to be able to compete with the blue chip clients in terms of getting contracts here. So just keep that in mind. And also older assets also break down, and you're going to end up in workshops, and the production stops and all that. So asset-based finance works. Approach an asset-based finance supplier like ourselves. It helps an SME. Don't outlay all your capital to buy your asset, guys. But also at the same time and I say it, Mark, with all respect, building a business, guys, for all SMEs, guys, takes time. Don't try. We're not going to buy Ferraris in month 1, guys, and live on golf courses in month 2. Let the business grow. Take your time when you grow the business. Get a mentor, learn the markets, talk to your financier, etc., and build up the business over time. And in time, should it be right, the luxuries will come here. So focus on your business. And I always say, rich people invest and poor people buy assets. Let's not buy assets, people, okay?
100%. But I like what you said earlier, Carl, there, is that, buy new assets. One thing we do know is that, broken assets causes no productivity, and no productivity causes business closure sometimes.
Very much so.
I think we're strong on that point for our SMEs out there, is that, buy new, you buy secondhand stuff. You don't, in some parts of life you can do that, but certainly not when it comes to business equipment, printing machines or things like that, because if something can go wrong, it does go wrong. And often we're not always that technically inclined, so we don't quite know what we're buying. So it's a great point there, Cole. Yeah. Coming back to terms, costs, and conditions, what funding terms, costs, and conditions should an SME understand before signing an agreement, Cole?
Yeah. So again, Mark, obviously they would have acquired an asset from a supplier. What we do from our side, we make sure that asset that the supplier is supplying to the SME, that it's priced right, it's not overpriced, because sometimes the guys are loading onto assets, and there's a reason for that. But at the same time, we don't want to get this position that should the SME not be able to service the debt, and we take the asset back, the outstanding debt on our account is much more than the value of the actual asset when you sell it on here. So to all the SMEs, understand the asset, understand the terms of our contract, and our contract is, what is the tenure? The tenure is a 3, 4, 5-year period. Also, make sure that you know exactly when your payment dates are. And for me, when is that payment date? Is your bank account has it got the 10,000 rand in a month? And I'm using the number now to service that debt on that debit order date. Also, just make sure that the insurance is covered, because we look at insurance 2 ways. We'd love to offer our insurance because then we know our asset is covered, and it gives also the SME that comfort. So just make sure that is done. But if you're going to take out your own insurance because you might have a going concern, then you've got to note our interest as a finance company on that insurance here. But what you can't do, guys, and we see this all the time, don't go take an insurance today and go cancel it tomorrow because your asset's then uninsured. And we say it can't happen to me. Trust me, it can happen to you guys. So we do the checks on that once a quarter to make sure those assets are covered, and obviously we do the checks. So Mark, the guys must just also just check with us. Are there penalty costs if they can't pay the installment? Are there penalty costs every month? What does it cost me if I pay late? But at the same time, I think I want to encourage SMMEs out there is, if you've got a problem and the business is struggling, or you've got a payment that's coming late, talk to your funder. Your funder must then assist you with that process. So come talk to your funder, allow us to restructure something, whatever. But at the same time we get to a point that if you can't continue as a company, Mark, because we're a rental asset-based finance company, we'll take the asset back and try to go back to a supplier to on-render to another customer here. But the last thing we want to do as a finance house, Mark, it's the last thing, and I'll say it a million times, is take an asset back. Our Our mandate in South Africa is to create job creation for South Africa. And obviously the SME market is an incredible opportunity for us to try to take that to a level that where there's so many people out there. Mark, you mentioned 30,000 people coming through your doors. I'm sure you'll be at 50,000 in 2 weeks' time. And we'd love to help as many people as possible just to create the job creation and just get South Africa back to where it should be.
Yeah, Carl, just all our attendees out there and to our NSBC team in the back end, yeah, if you just wouldn't mind putting your details on there, Carl, putting, of course, Finance Africa's details on, so in case after this, no doubt. Sorry, I just want to get rid of that. I've got many calls coming through because of the actual business show, but I have just wanted to check here. There we go. Sorry about that. You know, I don't have an off switch on these things at the moment. But yeah, please put Carl's or Finance Africa's details on the chat box just so that our attendees after this discussion can get hold of the team for, of course, funding needs or any queries that you may have, anything you'd like to discuss with them. There it is, financeafrica.co.za. But Carl, we're not quite finished yet. I just wanted to ask you one key important question. How can SMEs improve their chances of receiving funding?
Yeah, Mark, a good question. And I think we sort of went over it a little bit. The biggest thing for me, Mark, is prepare. You know, just prepare. You know, and again, it's all about history. So a lot of guys have got history in their own environment in terms of where their business is. And you know, when you come to an asset-based finance company, remember, part of our role is to make sure we understand all the sectors. We understand the markets. We understand where we are. We understand the assets. We understand what is going on out there and where it's good or bad. So all I say to a lot of the SMEs guys is, if you're not sure where to start, come chat to us even in the start process. We'll even help you in the start process. Go look for that. Can you get that, etc., etc. Yeah. So, but if you've got something that's real now, prepare. Come and talk to us. We'll guide you through it at the same time. And if it's already fundable, and you've brought us your application form, and you have got a track record, and you do own property, and you've come from another industry, but you want to start your own business, and you've got the skill set. You've got a business plan, you've got contracts in place, bring those contracts to us. Let us vet those contracts because those contracts are revenue generating contracts. So bring them also with us. We'll do our checks and balances on that. And then start a journey with us. And sometimes, Mark, a lot of people want to go too big too quickly. Yeah? So we want to build a relationship with the guys over time. Let us build that business with you over time. But again, I say, guys, prepare. Get somebody to help you with that. And I can't emphasize that enough, guys. And just remember, a funding process is not just the funder, guys. It's both of us, you know. And there's many people out there that do a great job doing that. But you know, I encourage guys to come to us at our stand. We're going to be at the show in the 2nd and 3rd, and come and meet our team there, Mark. And a lot of guys will help you go through that process, yeah. So just prepare, guys, and we'd love to assist where we can, yeah.
Yeah, they say, Carl, prepare, and don't be afraid to go big.
100%
so
correct.
If you need that funding, if you need that equipment to grow your business, it's a critical part. Please, but don't leave us yet. And also remember, Carl just said it. Join us at the business show in 2 weeks' time at Sandton. If you haven't registered, do yourself a favor. You know, many people will say that what they gain in 2 days, they will never gain in 10 years. So please join us at the business show, full with opportunities, full with funding like from Carl and their team. And of course, great ideas to accelerate your business. So we are going to say goodbye, but don't leave us. Watch the video on the business show from last year. It will inspire you to get that free ticket. Carl, it's been an absolute pleasure. And of course, we could have gone on for a lot longer, but certainly not the last time we were engaged. I will see you at the business show. We'll have a great chat there. And of course, thank you for being part of this, to yourself and the company Finance Africa. We are truly grateful. Thank you.
Cheers, Mark. And thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Come on.
For more business boosting content, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and like our posts.